this is actually not going to be a lecture or anything like that. Just wanted to have a discussion with you all with regard to the understanding of research as well as audits, and then about proposal writing. The issue is now any form of scientific writing, that is proposal writing, maybe research article writing, abstract writing, they all are they require certain sort of practice. It's not something that we can actually follow a course and then develop at the end of the course. So it is something that even when we although we do research, still we are learning. It's very difficult to teach someone or for us to learn art of writing by just following a course or something like that. It's about you keep on writing, making mistakes, and then learning by mistakes. So therefore, although we do various workshops and all that on research writing, proposal writing, data analysis, and so on, unless you don't involve in the actual process, it's very difficult to understand or master. So first, before now, clinical work. At the beginning, I must declare that I haven't done even a single clinical work. So I'm a researcher. So although I'm a researcher, I have done various types of research, but I haven't done a single clinical audit. So the knowledge that I have about clinical audits is basically based on reading. But clinical audit is a very simple form of work. It's not research. It's very easy. If you do research, it's a very simple thing to do a clinical audit. So first, now this distinction must be understood. What is a research and what is a clinical audit, right? So do you have any idea? Now I think there were some lectures. There was actually a lecture by I think Janet on clinical audits. Do you have any understanding? What do you think about the difference between research and clinical audit? How do clinical audits or audits differ from? Because audits also, they have different types. Clinical audit is the one that we are talking about, but there are any process can have a way of checking checks and balances. That is audit. Financially you do audits. Clinical, we are talking about clinical audits. How do clinical audits differ from research? Do you have any understanding or any idea? So the topic today is proposal writing. Before writing proposals, what I'm trying to do is to get a conceptual idea what should be included in the proposal, either research or audit. That is why I'm asking this question. Any idea what is research and what is audit? So now we practice Western science. All the knowledge that we deal with are based on Western science at the moment, the ones that we use in allopathic medicine. Our practice is based on Western science. So the way Western science develops knowledge is by scientific method that we learn from the school days, right? Scientific method. So it starts from an observation, and then based on the observation, you observe something what that famous thing like Newton and so an apple falling or whatever. You observe the thing and then you ask questions why this happens. You ask questions, and then based on to answer your question why something happens, then there is an existing knowledge in the humankind. Over the generations, people have developed knowledge, right? So based on that knowledge, now you are trying to answer the question came into your mind. So I'll take an example. Say this is about in 1960s or so on. People didn't know about viruses, right? Say you get chickenpox or something like that, right? You see patients, and then say you observe that people get these lesions, and then it's contagious to other people. And then once you get the disease, then you see that subsequently less likely that you develop that infection because of they didn't know at that time about immunity probably, right? They know that once you get the disease, due to some reason now you are safe from the disease, right? That is an observation, right? That's an observation. So then the question is, why this happens? What is the reason for this? What causes this problem? That may be one question. Why people don't get the disease again? That is the question that we ask, right? And then how do we explain that? So at that time, people may not have developed electron microscope. I'm not sure whether actually people have developed at that time, right? You understand? So then, based on the existing knowledge, they ask questions, and then they try to explain what has happened there, right? And then they develop hypothesis. Hypothesis is your explanation to your question based on current human knowledge, right? And then, but hypothesis is just a guess, learned guess. You are guessing based on what people know already. And then this guess has to be properly tested. That is how we develop hypothesis and then develop experiments to test that hypothesis. If the test result suggests that your hypothesis is true, you accept. If the test comes as hypothesis is false, then you have to design another study, ask more questions, and move on. Right? So that is the scientific process. So we every time we try to develop a hypothesis based on our knowledge, and then try to test, either prove or disprove your hypothesis. That this goes as a cycle going on and on. This is how the Western knowledge has been built up. So this is the process of which this scientific method works is the research. What we do as research is just basically following this scientific method, right? So research, there are various types of research, right? So we know even like a simple thing like a case report, it is a scientific research. That is, you see a patient and you systematically observe a patient and then find out something interesting in the patient and communicate with others. So say, for example, there's a drug that you often use for a certain disease, and there's this patient, the drug didn't work. Drug was not effective for that patient. And all other scientific evidence suggests this drug should work for this patient. Now you have a curiosity why this drug didn't work, right? So then sometimes you might find that, probably there was another drug given to this patient, and the reason why this drug didn't work probably may be due to a drug-drug interaction or whatever, right? So in the case report, not only you observe, then you provide an explanation as well, possible explanation why this happened, right? So you basically observe and provide a hypothesis. You are not going to test it because it's just a case report. If you are going to test it, then you have to design a more advanced study, right? So probably that might. So your learned guess has to be, for example, say. Then what you need to do is you just observe only in one patient. Then there may be few patients or several more patients in different hospitals that getting these two drugs together, as well as those who are getting only the other drug, right? So then you compare them, right? So these are like case control studies, retrospect. And then you can do prospective, right? So likewise, various study designs, somehow these are research. These are all research. And sometimes for a disease, you may comparing two drugs. Which one is most effective? So you can have studies up to randomized controlled trials. So these are all research, and they are called primary original research. That is, you develop knowledge by doing a design study. And then secondary research are basically you look at the primary research and then come into a conclusion. For example, say an antibiotic, right, is given for a certain infection, and there may be randomized control trials done in about maybe 20 different randomized control trials done in all over the world for this disease, this drug, right? And these randomized control trials may have concluded different conclusions. Some studies may have found, say, for example, in Russia, a study might say this drug doesn't work. But in US, the study might say this drug works. Understand? So then how do you come into a conclusion whether this drug works or not? So this secondary research is basically you look at all the randomized control trials, you evaluate them, what are their weaknesses, what are their strengths, and then finally come to a consensus. So there are statistical ways of analyzing that, right? Especially the diversity of the patients, how was the selection of patients, how biased was that, things like that taken into consideration, risk of bias, and then after that they come into a conclusion, right? So those are secondary research. These are all research, right? So what is an audit? Now, in a research, as I said so far, the objective is to generate new knowledge. Using scientific method, generate new knowledge. Audit is different from research because audit checks whether your practice is agreeing to the knowledge that has already been developed. So in research, you generate new knowledge. In audit, you check what you do at the board matches with the existing knowledge base or the existing knowledge. Is it clear? So that is the basic difference. So in audits, you can't generate new knowledge. What you do is you check whether in your hospital or in your unit, whether what you do is agreed to what is known by the humankind already, right? So that is the biggest difference between audit and research, right? So the differences are in research develops new knowledge, and also audit checks whether the existing knowledge is used for practice. Philosophy is research hypothesis driven. That means you have a learned guess about what happens, and then you try to test that with an experiment, right? But in audit, you just compare what you practice with the standard. Standard means the ideal practice. You compare your practice with ideal practice. So in research, you can do interventions. That means new tests, devices, new drugs, all that. But in audits, no, you can't do anything new. It's about you compare what you do with what you should do in the ideal setting. That's the audit, right? The statistical setting is now in research. We look at the population, take a sample, do a research, and then we generalize what we have found to the entire population or other populations. So in a properly designed research, what we do is, the way of statistically thinking is, our findings can be generalized to the populations, other populations. But in audit, it's not like that. It's very specific to either your unit, your hospital, or whatever the place that you do research. It is not relevant. It might be relevant, but it is not generally applicable for other places, right? So audit, that is why audit is a very kind of usually done with a very narrow scope, right? And then utility, that is from research you develop new guidelines, but audit, you see what you do actually follows a guideline, right? So those are the critical differences. So I'm asking this to understand, because people often confuse us audits versus research. They should be separate, right? They should be separated, and if you include research parts into audit, sometimes things get complicated, right? Then comes the ethical issues and so on. I will explain why that happens, right? So now what you can do is, I don't know whether it's a good time to do group work, but I think it would be easy for you to understand what I'm saying. If you think of examples of research and audit questions. So what is a research? So think of a research question and then audit question. So as I said, we ask questions, right? So maybe we shouldn't do group work because it's already close to lunch or past lunchtime. You may not really like to do group work, but if you're happy to do group work, I'm more than happy. All right, okay. So then shall we form maybe 3 groups or so on? Because this thinking is important. It will take about 5-6 minutes. Make few groups, maybe 3 or 4. How many we have? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, yeah, 5 or 6 per group would make. So think of each group. Please think of a research question, whatever it may be, a research question, and then also think of a audit question related to that topic. Research question and audit related to that topic. So then with that way we can distinguish the research from audit. Think of things you do every day in the boards. I will give you a guide. If you are not really sure about what you should do, I will give one guide, right? That is, please see, now this is an example. Think of this. Now antibiotics A and B both are in current use for treating the disease C. There's a disease called C and you have 2 antibiotics A and B, right? So A is the recommended one in the national guidelines and widely practiced, right? But because of A is unavailable sometimes A becomes unavailable, and then because of that some physicians use B as well, right? Because of the unavailability based on the experience. So based on that, if you do a research, the research question might be what is the effectiveness of drug B compared to drug A in reducing the mortality or hospital stay or whatever, a quantifiable thing, right? But the audit question may be whether my hospital unit adhere to the national guidelines in treating disease C. So in that case, how often do we use B instead of A? And in which circumstance we use that? Whether can we minimize that happening? Things like, do you understand the difference? So now thinking of this pattern, think of a research question and a audit question related to that. But when you plan the research, when you develop the question, right? At the same time, think at the end of the study what you want to find out, and also how do you do the study, right? The practical aspects as well, right? That is important. So what I'm asking is, there should be a justification for that. There should be a justification for selection of the research question and audit question. Done? Okay, so what are your questions? So this group, what did you think about the research? Come on. Audit? Routine use of? Yes, so the research question was what? No, not research, was it audit question? So the thing is this, now you have a certain practice and there should be a standard and you should compare. So the research question should, so the audit question should be an audit question. Right. You see, so the audit question is assess the percentage. No, that is okay. I mean, like it's more, but for an audit question, what now you are thinking about what sterile pancreatitis, whether you are adhering to a certain guideline, right? That is one. So then that includes use of antibiotics or not, or else use of antibiotics in sterile pancreatitis. So if you think of a research, now say some physicians or whoever, surgeons or whoever, use that, right, antibiotics, and some don't. And then there's this page, like say if you get 100 patients admitted to your hospital, certain units practice that, certain units don't practice. So how can a research be developed on that? Oh, even before that, I mean, randomized control trial is big, complex study. So that now you have a control, or if you have like say 2 groups, it can be just an observational study including 2 non-randomized groups, right, to compare whatever the outcome, right? If you can develop further that into maybe a randomized control trial, right, something like that. So what is your group's research question and audit question? That is the research question. So effectiveness in the research question, effectiveness of so you are testing 2 things, nebulization and steroids in effectiveness for what? When you the research question should be specific. Effectiveness in reducing what? The bronchiolitis. How do you measure the effectiveness? Whether it's from the hospital stay or requirement of certain management, how do you measure it? Symptomatic improvement or hospital. So that likewise, the research question should include what you are going to test, right? Otherwise, whether it's like, I mean, if you don't frame that, what you are going to test, it's difficult to understand. And audit, so in the standard guidelines, both included or not? Not included, right? So it's like, so the audit can be probably something like whether your unit adheres to the whatever the national guideline of managing bronchiolitis, right? Or else, that is probably the audit, right? That is the audit. You can select actually 1 rather than 2 because usually it becomes confusing. But still, when it comes to audit, because there are 2 things, still doesn't matter because you are testing whether the guideline has it or not, and you are using it or not, right? So that's the topic. I'll come in the second round why you used asking why you used that term, right? So the other group. Right. So then the intervention is there, outcome is, the testing outcome is there, and you are testing the mortality benefit, the death rates. Right. Okay. So that is the research question. So it's well framed. And audit question? Yes. Okay. So that is, but then that one is compared to a certain standard. Which standard that you follow? Standard is 24 hours. 24 hours. Right. So the 24 is the agreed one. So my point is now the guidelines. Now in audits, what we compare is a practice with a standard. Standard can be a guideline or even not a guideline. This standard can be like you can create a standard, right? Based on several guidelines. Because for certain diseases, I mean, like, you know, there are UK colleges and there are American colleges. They have various different guidelines. Sometimes European consensus statements and so on. So you even like there's so in Sri Lanka also there are national guidelines for certain. So it doesn't necessarily need to be. It doesn't necessarily need to be a national guideline or guideline. Still, the standard you can make if by coming into a consensus and justifying why you come into this standard, and then once you define the standard, you can compare that with the practice. Now, the next one. So at the end, when you think of the research question, did you think about what you try to find out at the end? What is the so at the end of the study, what do you want to find out? So in your case, whether there's a benefit. So is this the research one or audit one? Audit one. Is there a benefit for the patient? So now your standard was what? Not using it, right? So at the end of the day, now you see whether there's a benefit to the patient or not. That is basically the research question. So that is where the confusion comes. Because the standard, when you define the standard, you read a lot. You see the scientific evidence. Like in audit, you read the scientific evidence. So if there are, say, European guidelines, you read the guidelines and see why they have set this guideline. And you may have American guidelines and you read it and you define it. Once you define it, now it's about matching whether your unit practices that or not. If you do not practice, what is the reason and why you do not practice? And why you can't practice it? Are there any practical problems? And is there a way of you can improve, including those elements into your practice? Because always think of when you are doing audits, you have to think of how to improve the system, right? So, what is your what do you find out? Plan to find out at the end in the research? Okay, so basically, you test the hospital stay, and then whether use of nebulization and steroids, whether that actually reduces hospital stay. That is, so at the end you expect, you have a learned guess that would reduce the hospital, your hypothesis is that using that the hospital stay would be reduced, right? So at the end you expect hospital stay to be reduced, and if it is not, now then you have to leave the hypothesis aside, right? For audit, yeah, so in the audit, at the end, what do you want to find out? So it's not now, although we frame the question as whether our unit adheres to the guideline, then it's a yes and no answer, either yes or no. So, but still, in the audit, it's not like getting a yes or no answer. It's about exploring why this happens, right? So, what are the answers that you get at the end? So in that sort of audit, now see, at the end of the audit, you need to identify a issue in the process, and then you need to plan out a way of improving. If you are already doing a good thing, how to further improve it? If you are not doing a good thing, how to improve it? So at the end, so then in that case, are there patients who are not getting this treatment? Or do all get the treatment? So now again think what kind of system improvement it would lead to. Now checking the benefit is a research thing. Now I'm asking this question for you to understand whether your audit question is a valid audit question or not. Yes. Yes. So in that way, I'm asking now there's a problem. You are trying to get a research question answer by doing an audit. Do you understand what I mean? So that is why the research, it's important to define the standard first. So you do the literature search and you become absolutely sure that other countries and other settings, nebulization and steroids have a proven benefit. Now you don't have a doubt about it, right? So if your unit doesn't do that, or some patients are subjected to this treatment and some patients are not receiving that, then what audit should explore is how many cases do not get this desirable treatment, and what is the problem, why that happens. What is the reason? Is it like due to some certain doctors prefer not to use it, or whether there's system problem, maybe nurses too busy and or something like that, or then the adherence to the say nebulization, although you order, it doesn't really happen, or maybe like not happening in the regular intervals that you intended the patient to have it. Are you clear what I'm saying? Exactly. So you are practicing. Then in that case, why they do it, and what sort of say money, time, say a nurse for nebulization, how much allocation of a nurse for that purpose would cost for the ward and monitoring of other patients, things like that. So this exercise. Now with regard to other group, what do you? Exactly. So that is basically it. So that is why when you define in the audit question, you have to be very careful at the end of the day what you want to get, what kind of system improvement you want to get. Without thinking that system improvement, usually the audit question that you are going to ask may be a useless one at the end of the day. Are you clear what I'm saying? So this concept of setting is still not clear. Oh, clear. If you are not clear, just I think it's very important at this stage to separate this out and understand clearly what is an audit question, right? So in proposal writing, this setting the question is very, very important, right? Setting the question is very, very important. So because then based on that only, like now I ask at the end of the day what you want to get from your study. Based on that only you can plan a methodology, what kind of method you can follow. Now say for research question, for your one, is it what kind of research method you want to do? So for sterile pancreatitis, so there are two groups, some receive antibiotics, some not. And so you basically compare the outcome and see which one is benefited or not, or whether one group has benefited or one. There are sometimes maybe like non-inferiority, that is whether antibiotic group spreading so my question is, then you have to think of, now according to the research plan, if say for the third group, they said they want to check the or study the mortality benefit of going for the surgery early. So it's very clear you can do a randomized control trial to get the highest possible evidence. To get a randomized control trial, you can randomize the patient. One will do early surgery, one will one half will go, or group of patients might go usual late surgery and see whether there's a mortality benefit. Likewise, in your case also the same. But in methodology of the audits, what are going to do? So you know that you have a practice, and then you have a set of standard practice. How do you come into a conclusion that there's a set of standard practice? Say for your one, are there some guideline, national or local or whatever? So are these guidelines? So how sure are you that these guidelines are appropriate guidelines or suitable for your setting? So if there's no national guideline, and then you have European, no, American, no, several guidelines. So which guideline would you select to compare with your practice? How do you do that? So in your one, what is the guideline that you follow? Or is there a guideline? If there's no guideline, what is the standard practice that you define? So if you have a guideline, say a nationally accepted national guideline, you can come into a conclusion, the researchers or people who involve in the audit can come into a conclusion, this national guideline is the guideline that we accept as the standard, and testing the various steps in the guideline against what you practice. So what is included in the guideline, whether they are exactly practiced and whether some of them are deviated. So what is what kind of deviation is it, right? And then what are the reasons for deviation, right? So there's no question about, in audits, there's no question about the standard is correct. You are not going to test the standard now with the audit, right? Before accepting the standard, say there's a guideline and you accept that this guideline is the standard. Before coming into that stage, you have to come into a conclusion, consensus that you all agree this standard is the correct one, right? Yes, I mean the research, whatever the audit proved, but the problem is you are the researcher, not them. So basically, you should do the study, and then you should define. Yes. Now the thing is this. So again, come into the question: what at the end of the audit, what you are going to do? What is the improvement that you want to have it? So what?
Say for example, we don't have an aspect, for example, regarding thyroid surgery, research is the pandemic cancer or something. Nationally, there is no guideline to treat radiology in an example. So actually, you might not get there is no preventive guidelines to give radiology or not. So what we can do is like we can look at international guidelines. So they are like European and these guidelines are related to development evidence of global participants. We can see how those guidelines are saying now. Using my example, the European society says that radioactivity
Exactly. So that is that is the point that I'm trying to make. That is, the standard that you set is for your setting. What is suitable for your setting? So if the guideline is a national guideline, the standard may be much suitable because it's formulated by a national body. Say if you don't have a standard guideline nationally, then you have to, as research group, audit group, should go through the available guidelines and come into a consensus among yourselves what is best for you, and then check that standard with your practice. Understand? So there's nothing concrete about standard, but the only thing is during this methodology when you design the audit, during that process you should be pretty sure what is the ideal or the standard treatment or the standard practice should be. Once you set that, then after that it's about collecting data in your setting, because you have said the ideal standard may be having certain steps. Then collect data related to what do you do actually in your setting for each of the steps, and whether you actually do it or not. If you do it, how much you adhere to that standard. If you don't adhere, then what are the reasons, things like that. And in designing that, or in getting the information for that, what are the sources you use for audits? So how do you get the data to do the audit? How do you get the data for the audit? You can do retrospective. You can do retrospective for certain things. But sometimes retrospective things might not work for the, according to the nature of the audit. Say certain information, now if you retrospectively go, either by BHT or anything, then certain information are not recorded in the BHTs. So if you are looking for something that is readily recorded in the BHT, for example, say if you are looking at something like delays of, say, a surgery, if the BHT records at what time the patient was sent from the ward to the theatre, and theatre at what time they come to the theatre, and what exact time the patient was given anesthesia or started the surgery, and if you are interested in looking at that delay, of course, it's documented, not a problem. But say something like something not documented, like what the patient feels, or whether the discomfort, how uncomfortable something for the patient. Those things you need to prospectively collect data, right? And then anyway, you need to design data sheets and things like that for even audits, right? Depending on what data you are looking at, right? So when you plan this as these three things, that is, what is the audit question, and at the end of the study, what do you really want to find out? And then to achieve that, what is the methodology we are going to use? You should think, right? Basically, that is the research proposal. So research proposal is, you have a research question, or in an audit, you have an audit question, and you think at the end of the day, what you want to have. In an audit, a system improvement. What sort of system improvement you want to see? In a research, what is the answer that you want to get from the question? And then what kind of methodology you need to use to come into that. Basically, basis wise, we write research proposals. So the reason, why do we get research ideas into our brains, and why do we take time to write proposals? Why do we write? Well, I mean, like, you always think of research then I should write a research proposal. So why you should write a research proposal? What is the reason? So basically, yes, very true. So basically, first thing is to convince yourself that this is worthwhile doing. So we get thousands of research ideas, right? The problem is when you start reality checks, like, writing down the research question, and then think about at the end of the day what you want to achieve, and then how can I achieve this, right? That is, then only you would be able to come to a judgment that whether this is a worthwhile study or not, right? So research proposal is something, a document that you clearly write the research question. What is the importance of doing this study, right? And then what is the human knowledge base with regard to this? Say if it is a research question, what is humankind known up to this level about this problem? And then what is the problem that you are going to answer or come a resolution. Clear? So then you are quite clear what is the problem is. Then only after that you plan a methodology to test that. Right? So research proposal is a document that actually clearly documents. So there's a when people talk about research, there's a thing called so what question, right? So usually people ask so what? ඉතින් මොකද වෙන්නේ එහෙම තිබුණාද? So the so what questions should be answered by all research. If you say I have a research idea, then if I ask so what? Then you have to answer give a confident answer why I'm going to do this study, and this is the benefit of doing this study. So in the research proposal, you are going to convince the reader why this is important, right? So as you said, for things like audits and also research, you need to get administrative clearance. So by writing the proposal correctly, administrative clearance, right? They have to read it and understand why this should be done. You try to convince others, right? And ethical approvals. Ethics committee will look at the ethics aspect. So there are certain differences of the proposal when it comes to applying for ethics, because you are trying to now convince the ethics committee. If you are using the proposal for the administrative clearance, you are convincing the administrators that this is benefit for the system, right? Clear? So there are subtle variations of the proposal, but the general build-up is the same, right? If you want to get funding from some organization, now you are trying to convince them that by funding this kind of things can be achieved. Clear? So I'll clear my point. Yeah. So basically, in the research proposals, basically going back to the scientific methods, observation, questions, searching literature, that is, there's a literature usually research proposals, right? You have a good literature review to show that this is what is known by the humankind up to now, but these are the gaps, right? And now we are trying to search or explore these gaps, right? So what are the qualities of a good research proposal, right? So basically this is about research, right? Not audit. So there should be a clear logical research question. The research question should be logical. There should be a meaning for that, right? There should be a meaning for that. And then your research question should be justified based on the current knowledge. That is why you do a literature search in your proposal writing and justify your question, right? Sometimes you might come up with a very outdated question if you don't do a adequate literature search. People may have done that before and you are trying to do it again because you are not updated, right? And then the aim is a broad objective, right? Broadly what you are going to achieve at the end, right, of the study. That should be aligned with the research question. And then objectives are the specific ones. Within the broad aim, objectives are the specific objectives, right? So they also should align with the aim as well as the research question, right? So when we evaluate proposals, that's what we evaluate. What is your research question? Whether it's meaningful, whether it's backed with the scientific justification that you provide, and whether aim is aligned with the research question and the objectives are aligned with the aims and the research question. And then what you need to see is whether the methodology that you are going to answer you try to use to test your hypothesis or the research question, whether these methodologies are able to answer the question, right? Say if you want to test the effectiveness of drug A versus B, and if you are not using a randomized control trial, that is not an appropriate design. Things like that, right? And then Methodology should be practical. Sometimes you have a very ambitious research plan, but the methodology is not actually practical in your setting. Right? For example, if you are trying to do a multi-center big trial, and only few of researchers here get together and try to do that without proper funding, then the plan is ambitious, but there's no practical way of doing it, right? And then the time frame. Sometimes you start studies. Say, if I have started a large randomized controlled trial about something related to COVID, which drags for 5 years, then COVID doesn't stay for all the time, right? So the time frame, there's a problem. So your research proposal should have a time frame that is relevant to the question and get the answer, right? And then ethical. Definitely research deals with ethics, so that ethical aspects should be included in the proposal, right? And then after that, new important knowledge should be generated and the proposal should show that, right? So in the components, how do we include this in a document? So the essential components are title. There should be a clear title of research proposal, right? Clear title. And then you should have an abstract, right? Abstract usually about 200 words. That is because people, whoever the evaluator of the proposal, should be able to quickly read and understand what you are going to do, right? And then introduction or background, right? So it's usually written like in a funnel, right? So you start broadly about say, in the first group, now you said about sterile pancreatitis. Sterile pancreatitis, how big the problem is, something like that, right? Whether worldwide, what is the, how common it is. And in Sri Lanka, how common it is. How big the problem is in your ward setting, something like that, right? Start from a big thing. And then slowly narrow down to your problem, saying that why people use antibiotics, why some people don't use, and the evidence up to now is mostly favoring not using antibiotics, but what is the reason some people use it, right? You understand? So likewise, you slowly from a very broad beginning, slowly narrow down to your point, right? Introduction is like a funnel. You start with the broad base and then gradually narrow down to your question. And introduction usually finishes with the significance or justification of your study. It can be a separate section or included in the introduction, right? Justify why you should do your study. And then statement of purpose, right? Or research question. What is the exact research question, right? Whether, say, use of antibiotic use has any benefit, whatever, mortality or morbidity or hospitality, whatever, benefit for sterile pancreatitis, something like that. And then you have to do a literature search to see what is seen in the literature, right? So this part, literature review, can also be included into the introduction. Different people write in different ways, right? Some people just include everything into the introduction, right? But I say that it's better to have the statement of purpose or the research question separately, then come to a literature search. What is done locally and other countries. Then you should write the aims, right? What are the aims? And then specific objectives, right? Then only the methodology, right? In the methodology, that it should include the ethics as well. How do you apply ethics? And are there any ethical issues related to your proposal, right? Those things you have to describe. And then plan for knowledge dissemination. At the end of the day, once you find out your results, how do you disseminate your knowledge? And then time frame. That shows whether you have a plan of conducting this within a given time frame. Usually as a Gantt chart that you can use it, right? And then references and appendices are usually, if you have data collection sheets, data sheets, or whatever tools, you can include as appendices. So these are the ideal components of a research proposal, right? So usually when you write them, background and justification, you write in a present tense, right? Present tense. But literature review, past tense, because it's about something done previously. And then methodology in future tense, right? And then these things like free of grammar and spelling mistakes, which is very important, and nowadays people use all sorts of applications very easy, like things like Grammarly, or even say if you use now increasingly people use assistants, AI assistants for writing. If you are using AI assistants, not for literature search, so you can do the literature search and write your article and then ask AI to make it more professional. That is language assistance, but not the AI to do the literature search, because that will end up in a disastrous way. That is the problem. So you can't do it for that purposes, right? And then use of referencing applications like Mendeley and all that are quite important. I think those are things that you can learn by yourself, rather than there are many tutorials, online tutorials, how to use them. And here also we did neither. We did Mendeley Karana. Israel. Yeah. And then audit proposals. Similarly, why we do that? To convince ourselves that it's a worthwhile study to do. As I said, always if you do an audit, think why we are doing it, and then what we try to get. And plan the study very well, it's very important. And then to get the administrative clearance, right? So, good audit proposal, again, clear logical audit question should be there, statement of purpose, why you do that, right? And then aims and objectives should be clearly specified, and objectives should be within the scope of the aim. And then this part, clear justification of the standards. As I said, how you define standards is a very important thing in the methodology of the audit proposal, right? So it's not in research, but in the audit proposal, defining standards. What is the standard that you are going to get? Whether it's a accepted guideline or you are using couple of guidelines, whether you are setting a new standard, things like that, right? And then plan for data collection, comparison of data and the standard. How do you compare the data and the standard? So what is the tool that you are going to use? What kind of data collection sheet you use to compare standards with what you practice, right? And then these are also important. That is plan for feedback. Whatever the finding you get in the audit cycle, what is the plan of communicating that to the authorities, right? And then how do you implement it? What is the mechanism for implementing? And then whether there's a re-auditing process. Let's say, for example, say you did the audit and after that you wanted to now stop nebulizing and steroid treatment, right? So what you do is now say you want to now implement. What is the plan to implement it? And after that, you re-audit and see whether still people are doing the same mistakes again and again. So that plan should be there in the audit proposal, right? So I think audit cycle and all that you already know. I think there's no need of talking about it. What I want to highlight is, in the audit proposal, in the methodology, you have to show that you have a plan for this audit cycle, not just to do the audit, but how do you include your findings into the audit cycle and keep it moving, right? So in audit proposals, aims, objectives and standards, how do you define, are really important. So there's for standards, there's thing called SMART, like specific. Standard should be specific, measurable, should be agreed upon everyone involved, should be relevant to the condition that you are talking about, and they should be theoretically sound in the sense scientifically up-to-date knowledge matches with your standards, right? And one other thing is when you do plan audits, then can be unidisciplinary. That means patient care. So you are looking at say patient care and something in doctor's hands, right? Or else that can be multidisciplinary. Patient care, your audit includes what the nurses does, what the other healthcare workers do, as well as doctors. So usually in settings like UK, the guidelines are if you do multidisciplinary involved audits, so as doctors, if only the doctors involved in the audit process, right? And then you are trying to recommend things related to other categories. Usually in settings like UK, they don't really accept that. If you are going to recommend something related to other profession, they also be included in the audit process. That is the standard of NHS, right? That's how they do in NHS, right? So that is so basically, but in our setting, it's difficult. I mean, like practically, you may not be able to get people involved in that manner, but that is the ideal thing. Just have that in mind, right? And then ethical aspects of audits, right? You have to be 100% sure it's not a research and it is an audit. If it is a research, you have to take ethics, right? And then although the audits do not need ethical approval, it should be conducted under ethical framework. So for example, things like confidentiality of the patients and all that, they are fundamental ethical principles. So you don't need a specific approval for audits, but still you have to adhere to ethics, right? And then patient surveys, especially if you use patient surveys, like you survey the patients prospectively, asking what is your experience about this and things like that. Then sometimes, especially like data collection and storage wise, there can be ethical problems because you collect personal data, sometimes sensitive data, right? So those are important. And in such cases, it's better to get a consultation from the ethics committees and see whether they suggest taking ethics approval, right? And especially if you are going to publish this, definitely ethics are required, right? Ethics are required if you are going to publish this. Audits are system improvement processes, right? So usually you don't need to publish, but if you want to publish, make sure that you take ethics, right? And then audit forms, right? Data collection, audit forms you should develop in the process, right? So basically that's I wanted to cover. Are there any unclear areas? Same day barcode
there are European Society of Cancer guidelines suggesting that what we usually practice is meet the patient day prior and do our preparation on the evening as an explain what that we go. But same day preparation practice are under 4 days and colonoscopy done the same. So we are practicing the 3 goals, but we are trying to do the week to implement the same day. So that the outcome we are starting to the applicant. And of the research is to compare the PW for preparation they are started collecting out. There are different for preparation for the
So basically, first question is it an intervention? Are you doing an intervention or new practice that you are not doing? Oh, so are you going to deviate from the standard practice?
The standard practice is sometimes I say you can do power preparation on people, that is evening and the face. And another guy can say
Yes.
both are there. But what we are trying to do is the brain way. So that we can improve on there. So in terms of reconnection, yes, we are trying to use the power preparation shape. But it is already in the design, it is already in the guidance.
So it is like this. Now, what is so at the moment? What is the reason for your current practice?
It's how it has been.
Right.
Because,
But
now that it's like two different people like both sides very scale on your kind of scale. They are saying the kind of moving it here, they are different. And it's a research that both are accepted, but they are different if you do it here in our system. And here's the difference. Why there's a that is what it are. Whether there's a difference in the research.
right. Okay. So what now practically an easy way of tackling this is, so for certain patients you do start the new practice because that is not prevented by anything, because it's also a standard practice and you do it for some time. Some patients receive it, some patients don't receive it, right? And then you can do now. So what you can do is once you start doing that, then you develop a proposal and get the ethical approval. You do an observational study over a certain period, because some patients are treated like this and some are treated like this. We are now going to compare the two groups with related to these outcomes.
My question. So the ideal
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, like, it's not even like that. You don't, I mean, like, you can do a retrospective study, no problem. But here, my question is the intention. You are not trying to, like, you want to implement this as well. So the intention is not purely just to try to do a research and stop it. You want to improve the system. So what you can do is, you can actually change the practice. Certain patients you do sometimes, like, I don't know, maybe if there are two consultants, one does something and the other one a different practice or whatever, right? But you are not going to introduce a new untested intervention. So there's no problem with that. So once you started doing this, you just put an ethics approval application asking that you are going to do an observational study and we want to get the approval. Once you do that, you can finish it.
Because usually, as I said, some patients at the the way and there are some things. I don't because they need like some patients to try out we do the same thing or we already have that data. So in trying to publish that, saying that in those only 13 that is only two kind of
No, I don't see any ethical problem in doing that, because as long as if it is a practice that is practiced in elsewhere and it's not a new thing, just apply for ethics. That's it. Yeah, that's right.
That's also we have we do cancer and fibrosis. So some patients are even lost. So some are even paralytical loss, some are even with the time frame. So patient is first on the list. take some time for the analysis to be done. So what we do is we don't focus on this part. We thought that we don't know. So we wanted to see the patient's post-operative, like how to grow the patient complaint of pain, time of recovery, including utilization of the patient. So we have already started and the mechanisms of the different types of programs. So in terms of again trying to start this and because someone even got someone.
Yes. Again, the same thing. You can say the practice is that some patients receive this, some patients don't receive. But here it's a research question, so that you have to get an ethical approval to see, say, if I don't know what is your design, maybe it's prospective, maybe like retrospective you can't do because you have to assess the pain scale so that you can design it as a prospective study. No problem. Yeah, it doesn't matter. So then in that case, it's a prospective study where you have two groups. So non-randomized trial, right? So trials can be randomized or non-randomized, can be controlled or non-controlled. So sometimes there may be two interventions comparing, sometimes two interventions plus no intervention, like what. So this is a non-randomized observational study. So if you don't have any questions, then I'll wind up. I don't know whether this session was useful at all, but my idea was to have, now the problem is people write proposals and submit without answering the fundamental questions why we are doing this, right? Once you are clear, it's very easy to sort out the things. Otherwise, there's no way of doing a kind of a workshop of how to write and all that, because those are things you have to practice and do. Okay, thank you very much.